Good evening, everyone. And welcome back to Cambridge and the 627th term of the Union. Our debate tonight is by tradition the first of every year that this House has no confidence in His Majesty's government, and we are honoured tonight to be joined by some exceptional individuals. In proposition, the Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry and political editor of the Mirror John Stevens are joined by student speaker Katie Heggs. Opposing the motion, we have Sir Robert Buckland and Tom Hunt MP, joined by Sam Speary from Clare. Before we begin, as I can see many new faces on the backbenches, let me just give a quick moment to introduce ourselves to the rules of engagement. Each paper speaker tonight has 10 minutes to make their case. The first and last minutes are protected time, during which no points of information can be made. As members, this is your House, and we welcome contributions from all. So between each round of paper speakers, there'll be time for speeches from the floor in proposition, opposition, and abstention. Should you wish to make one of these, please just put up your hand when the moment comes, and wait for a microphone to come to you if you're chosen, before stating your name and college for Liliana to enter into the records book. In this House, we also allow points of information from the floor. These are short, 1 or 2 sentence questions, which must take the form of a question, so please do keep to that. If you wish to challenge something the speaker has said, please simply stand up, and the person speaking can choose to recognise you or not, and so to take your POI. If they haven't recognised you after 5 seconds or so of standing, you may politely, and I must emphasise politely, say on that point or point of information, but not your mum, please. Remember, though, that it is the speaker's time, so if they do not wish to take you, then they do not have to. Okay, let's get started. So opening the debate tonight is Emily Thornberry. Emily is the Shadow Attorney General for England and Wales. A Labour Party politician, she has been the Member of Parliament for Islington South and FInsbury since 2005, and has previously held the positions of Shadow Foreign Secretary, Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, and Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. Emily, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to come and speak to you. I always really enjoy coming here, and it's such a pleasure to be here this evening with so much material. But may I also begin by saying how pleased I am to be sharing this debate with Sir Robert Buckland, who is speaking on behalf of the other side. We have much in common. We equally have a passion for music, for cats and for wine. We both spent 2 decades as barristers before becoming members of Parliament. And most important of all, we have a reputation for both of us for spontaneously bursting into song. But I promise that we won't do that until after the debate is over. I also welcome Tom Hunt, and I welcome him to the opposition benches. I hope he's getting cosy there. Earlier this year, there was a new faction of Tory MPs that he set up. It had a new logo. Most importantly, it was made up of new MPs from 2019. And in order to make it clear, it was called the New Conservatives. But confusingly, their 5-point policy plan on immigration was entirely about bringing back immigration to the old levels as it had been in 2019, when, even more confusingly, we were in the European Union. One of the characteristics of the New Conservatives is that we always get is that they have lots of old-fashioned criticism of their own government. So I will be intrigued to see the way in which Tom votes tonight. And finally, we have John Stevens, who joins us in the proposition. He's the political editor of the Mirror. All 3 MPs that you have here tonight, we're in the middle of our conference season, which is a pretty grueling time for us, you know. We have a schedule of meetings and speeches and receptions, brackets drinking. We have to walk miles between the meetings and the speeches and the receptions, brackets drinking. And afterwards, we collapse into bed for 24 hours, giving our brains, our vocal cords, and of course our livers a good rest. But here we have John, Because not for him any rest, because he has just finished the Tory conference and he's packing his bags and he's going off to Liverpool for the Labour conference. So I am incredibly impressed and grateful that you've taken the time in between to come and be involved in this debate. I say I've done lots of these debates, and I have to say that quite often it really boils down to the government's judgment on big issues. So, austerity versus investment, or Remain versus Leave, or war versus peace. In the past, you know that even if you disagreed with the other side, you knew that your opponents had those views that were genuinely held and honestly held. And I have to say, there really is a big difference now. This is the first time I can remember, and I've been actively involved in politics for 40 years. I've been an MP for 18. And I have not ever seen a government that doesn't appear to care about the national interest or what's best for our country. It seems to have given up. It seems to have lost interest in governing. And so what I say to you tonight basically is this. You don't have to be a Labour supporter. You don't even have to be a supporter of any of the opposition parties. In fact, you can aspire to be the future leader of the Tory party, and yet you can still vote for this motion, because what you need to do in order to vote for this motion is to believe in good government. And the idea that the people who run this country actually should care about this country. Now, I've got loads of examples that I could give you about this, but I'm just going to stick to two. And I'm going to stick to two big ones, and two big ones that we've heard recently. So let's start off with them. HS2. HS2. Whatever you may think about HS2 and whether it should go all the way to Manchester or not, the one thing we can all agree on was that that decision was made not for you look at the reasons for making it, and they owe nothing to good government and everything to expediency and everything to tactics. Why am I saying this? Because the government wants to find, in my view, some money for tax cuts before the election. But they can't do that because they'll break their fiscal rules. So what do? So they start kind of like talking about, generally they talk about, maybe we can break the triple lock on pensions. But they got such a backlash, they realised they couldn't do that. So what do? They conjure up £35 billion. Ta-da! And how do they do that? By getting rid of high-speed 2 second leg. Now, that's what they do. And I know, they say they're going to spend every single penny on local transport, but they're not going to spend every single penny on local transport this year, not in the year before the election. What are they going to do with that? It's going to sit on the balance book at the Treasury, and the Treasury are going to say, we've got loads of money. We've got loads of money. This gives us the headroom for Mr. Hunt to go along and, within his fiscal rules, to cut taxes before the next election. Watch this space. This is what they're doing. There we have it. It's a short-term bribe presented with massive brass neck. They're trying to tell us that it's all about long-term decision for the nation's infrastructure. But actually, it's a total reversal of everything that Hunt and Sunak have ever said about high speed 2 in the past, and to appear as tax cutters in the future. And then we suffer 5 days of the Tories telling us that no decision has been made. Rishi Sunak appearing everywhere saying, no decision's been made yet, no decision's been made. And it's an insult to us. And yet, because he wants to hold it back for his speech. And then when he makes his speech, we find that it's backed up by a video that he made 2 weeks ago. Like 2 weeks ago. Imagine being a member of the cabinet that allegedly made the decision that morning and then find out that actually the decision was made at least 2 weeks ago because he made the video then. People should expect from government basic constitution. Yes, of course.
To that point, obviously Keir Starmer is on record having spoken in Parliament opposing HS2. Has he worked out what his position is now?
And so what people need to do with a government is they need to have some kind of basic consistency. They need to have a government that makes decisions on the basis of what is good for the nation. There are decisions that could be made on the basis of trying to trap the opposition or trying to be involved in campaigning, but that would not be something which was being made on the basis of what is for the benefit of the country. And it seems to me there should be some sort of sense of responsibility, some sort of sense of honesty, because economic stability, investment, growth all demand it. And yet you get none of that from this government. HS2 has played out in public. We've seen what it is that they've been up to. Who knows what other big decisions have been brushed under the carpet by this government for some other minister or some other government to address at a later stage. It's become a bit of a joke. You can't get a GP, you can't get a train, etc., etc. But what worries me is that actually your generation, and indeed the whole of our population, is beginning to get used to the idea that the state can't do a job, that the state can't look after us, that the state doesn't work, that actually the government doesn't ever achieve anything. And that we should never, ever put up with. The state really should be able to do things. Things really should be able to get better. People used to say that, and they did get better. Unfortunately, it was before an awful lot of you were even involved in politics or realised, because most of you have only ever seen a Tory government. And what have they achieved in 13 years? I mean, seriously. Is anybody any richer? Are public services any better? Is there any infrastructure? No. They have not been able to achieve anything, and the worry is that that becomes a baseline, and people think that's what politics is about. And so people turn their back from politics and think that actually there's no point in being involved. And yet there is, because politics can make a real difference to people's lives if you get a decent government. Mario, my second example of this government, refusing to govern in the public interest. So that net zero and clean air. They have decided to abandon long-standing Conservative policy about which there has been consensus. Why? Why? In order to stoke up culture wars, in order to talk about cars and meat and bins. I mean, it's so cynical as to be shameless. They had to make up a list of all the other things they were going to scrap just in order to sell the argument. Yes, of course. It was
obviously
Obviously, in terms of net zero, you can make the argument that culture wars have played a part, but surely, and this admittedly is to some extent the government's fault as well, the impact on the poorest people in our country of certain policies that lead towards net zero can hardly be considered just a culture war issue.
So the question then is, when it comes to stoking up culture wars in relation to cars, they talk about, we mustn't have electric cars because people won't be able to afford them. Perhaps they haven't spoken to people who can only just afford a car, because most people who can only just afford a car don't buy a new one. They buy a second-hand one, and those ones will still be petrol. So it'll be the richer people who will be buying the electric cars. That's the answer. So as I say, it's just a game. This is not about trying to change the world for the better. I met a man the day after Sunak made that speech whose whole company made electric vans. And they had no idea what was going to happen next. And they had no idea. Their whole business model had been based on the idea of government targets. And now the government had just changed them. What were they to do? They did not know. He didn't know if he was going to have a job. He didn't know what was going to happen to his company. That's the reality when you play games like this. I have a minute left. So all that money that has been spent on innovation was just torn up. And yet, he tears up all these targets, he tears up consensus, and why is he doing it? They also have a moral obligation to do the right thing for this generation who will have to be picking up the pieces. No infrastructure and nothing about net zero that's really going to work. It's you guys that are going to have to pick up the pieces in relation to that. And why are they doing all of this? They're doing all of this because they want to spend the next year campaigning. It's not as if they want to govern. They just want to campaign. And then you go, well, why do you want to campaign? Oh, well, we want to campaign because we want another 5 years in government. Well, why do you want another 5 years in government? You don't even know what you're doing this year. So what is this about? It is about time we put them out of their misery. Right? Put them out of their misery. If there's an election sometime soon, vote Labour.